John Kim from Rethink Reviews, as usual, joins us. John, how are you?
Doing well.
Now, yesterday, John, we reviewed Men Who Stare at Goats on the show, right? So now, if you want to check out John's review of it, go to Rethink Reviews on YouTube,
Yeah.
and he also publishes on Huffington Post as well. But so since we reviewed it yesterday, we're skipping that part. But we want to give you a little summary of what's in the movie, and then what we want to do is come back. This is why we brought John in to talk about the reality behind it. Did the U.S. military actually do this? So here's a small clip from the movie.
We have to dream a new America, an America that no longer has an exploitative view of natural resources, no longer promotes consumption at all cost. But to achieve this dream, we must become the first superpower to develop superpowers. We must create warrior monks, men and women who can fall in love with everyone, sense plant auras, pass through walls, stop saying mindless cliches, and see into the future. I want you to join me in this vision. Be all you can be.
All right, there it is. Now, first, what was the name of the movie? What was the real name? How real was it? Let's start there.
In the movie, they call it the New Earth Army. In real life, it was called the First Earth Battalion. And the guy who created this idea, his name is Jim Channon, Channon. And he's basically the character that Jeff Bridges is based off of.
Okay, and what was the first battlefield Earth supposed to do?
Well, basically, it's very interesting. I mean, it goes back to the idea of warrior monks, which is basically kind of like what samurai are. Because it's so, I mean, when you think about it now, we talk about soldiers as grunts, people who just go out and fight and carry out orders. But with the samurai, the idea was like, to be a great samurai, you had to be a great artist, you had to study the natural world, you had to write poetry, you had to do calligraphy, and that they were kind of like this intelligent class, which gave them more kind of weight. And so he was basically saying that we should return to something like that, and that he says at one. So I read the First Earth Battalion Field Manual. At one point, he says there is no contradiction in the warrior and the service-oriented monk prototypes living a completely harmonious, blended, and parallel path when the basic ethic in service is loving protection of evolution and humankind.
Well, that is certainly progressive.
Yes.
So what's interesting is that the military decided to try this. How long did they try it, and did they give it a real effort?
Well, it seems like, I mean, like in the manual, he just gives a lot of options for ways that officers can try to integrate some of his teachings. And he said, just do it however you want to, like whatever works best for you, whatever works best in your theater. I'm not sure how long the actual program took place. But one thing that he's in a video of Jim Channon, he said like one of the things that he suggested to them was, why don't we just take like dune buggies and put weapons on top of them instead of like these big tanks and stuff. And they did a war game where they found that these dune buggies could actually defeat and outmaneuver tanks that cost $3 or $4 million. I mean, you think about that as like a California type thing, the dune buggy sort of thing, but that's actually a reasonable suggestion.
No, but that's the thing. When you have outside the box thinking like this, it could wind up being very, very helpful from a military perspective. But what was the non-military aspect of this? I mean, because the whole point of this was to not emphasize force, right?
Well, that was what was so interesting about this manual is that it really preaches a complete transformation of what the military is and what it should do, and saying that basically with nuclear wars, we don't need big ground armies anymore, because it's not really going to make a difference. So he was really saying that that they should become like these warrior monks and basically preach peace and get in the way of battles. Like at one point, he lays out a battle scenario. He says they parachute in that morning and stood in two lines facing each opposing army. So this is getting between two fighting armies. The Earth Battalion satellite above beamed this image to the globe. The Earth watched as this potential catastrophe awaited the conscience of one or both of the commanders to act, for they would have to bloody the Earth Battalion people in their path before they could attack, and the world would know who started it. So they would basically end conflicts, not to actually try to create them, but to end them.
By getting in the middle of them. But you know what? other people have tried this in a lot of ways, like the people who go and sit in houses so they don't get bombed by the U.S. military or by whoever else from time to time, and that hasn't really worked. Those houses get bombed anyway.
They do get bombed, but I mean, if you look at like things that happen in Israel, where Israel can say they won the battle, but the whole world sees what they did, like to the Palestinians, so they kind of didn't win the battle. And like that was one of the more surprising things in this, and I think this was definitely adopted by the military, that he says that there's a new style of warfare. He said, quote, "We call it the combat of the collective conscience. This combat projects the winning force as one which executes the more ethical action in the face of accompanying cameras. This changes the alternatives to force projection. It pretends non-violent combat. It expands the boundaries of action and reaction."
John, it's interesting what was adopted and not adopted in that, because on the one hand, you're right. They adopted the idea of using the media, right, and a lot of others, not just the United States military, about using the media to gain sympathy and affect the collective consciousness. On the other hand, the military also adopted it in the reverse. Let's use the media to show people shock and awe, and us bombing the living crap out of a country,
right?
And then that'll scare the bejesus out of people,
right? And I was also thinking, like when the statue of Saddam came down, like in the square, and how it turns out that was this completely orchestrated event. But think of how powerful that was to Americans to see all these people cheering and the statue coming down and people hitting it with their shoes, and that really endured and really made people believe that, oh, we totally did the right thing. That was great for us to go in and do that.
Okay, so now, did these guys wind up, like in the movie, going back into Iraq?
Well, I think they're saying. I mean, in the movie, Kevin Spacey, who's one of these soldiers, basically becomes a freelancer and is just kind of selling his services and basically kind of non-violent ways to do violent things to people, if there is such a thing. But yeah, I mean, one idea that came up in this was that like the uniforms of the First Earth Battalion, they would have like ginseng regulators, divining tools, and when they went into conflict areas, they would have loudspeakers on their uniforms that would play indigenous music and quote words of peace. Soldiers would carry symbolic flowers and symbolic animals like a baby sheep or something.
Oh, that did not get adopted.
But you know what's so interesting about this is that I talked to a guy from Pakistan when I worked at Brave New Films, and he was talking about right after 9/11, and he said, like, I know this would never happen, but right after 9/11, if Bush and some of his top officials went to the Taliban, and they went with a bunch of turbans and maybe like 50 or 100 sheep, and they went to the Taliban and agreed to sit down in a tent with them on the floor in a circle, and said, okay, some of your guests killed 3,000 of my people, so 3,000 of your people are now mine. I've come to you in a respectful way. Now let's negotiate. Like, your guests did something terrible. I would like you to turn them over. And this guy named Faisal, he said, maybe a lot of conflict could have been ended. I would have never happened if that had happened, but to realize that how important it is that like you need to sit on the ground, like you can't have a table between you. Like if you're a Pashtun, like you're not negotiating if there's anything between you.
Yeah.
Like,
now, let me explain something to you. Here's what wasn't going to happen. That. Okay. Bush after 9/11, putting on a turban and sitting on the ground with the Taliban. Right. Okay. So now, finally, in the movie, they present these guys as trying to walk through walls, be invisible, etc. Did they actually try that psychic stuff and affecting things with their thoughts? And do we know if it had any success?
Apparently, they really did try this, and there's online you can find an interview with a guy he says that he killed actually I think 2 goats with just with his thoughts, and that they were in a separate room, but like it took days to do. Like he would
it took days. So
yeah, he'd be sitting and concentrating for 3 days. And I mean, like in the movie, George Clooney's character says that like when he killed the goat, that was like the curse that was put on the on the what they call the New Earth Army. And when you read the manual, it really, because it's so much about nonviolence and being in harmony with nature, and really using the military to do this for like reforestation projects, and building canals and waterways and things like that, and teaching inner city youth. Like I mean, a lot of it is very hippie, but a lot of it is actually kind of attractive.
Right, I hear you. So that's why I didn't catch on. No, I mean, as we explained, some of the things did, right? Yeah. And who's to know if that guy I mean, my guess is he didn't really kill the goats with his thoughts,
Right.
right? But it would be far out if he did. Another reason why I suspect that he didn't, other than the fact that it appears to be impossible, is that if he had, my guess is that the Army would have poured in a tremendous amount of money studying that further.
Right.
So, all right, Jonathan Kim's from Rethink Reviews. Check it out on YouTube and on Huffington Post. John, thanks for the information. It was excellent, really interesting. We'll come right back. Young Turks.